Empires do not always fall to cannon fire. Sometimes they fade in silence, across polished tables where maps are unrolled and voices stay low. This story does not begin with an explosion or a siege. It begins with ink drying on paper. In quiet rooms lit by oil lamps, agreements are signed that promise stability and deliver dependence. The Ottoman Empire is still alive at this moment. It still stretches across continents. Its flags still fly over ports and cities that once ruled global trade. But something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface. Britain is not preparing an invasion. It is preparing an arrangement. It is watching weakness harden into opportunity, waiting for the right moment to step in without stepping forward. Think about that. From the outside, nothing appears urgent. Ships move through the Bosphorus. Markets buzz with sound and color. The empire looks intact, even dignified. But behind the ceremony, the math is turning against it. Wars have grown more expensive. Administration has expanded. The world economy is changing faster than imperial systems can adapt. The Ottomans need railways to move troops and goods. They need ports that can handle steamships. They need modern weapons to deter rivals circling their borders. All of this costs money. Not just once, but forever. Maintenance, fuel, interest. The bills never stop coming. Britain understands this reality well. It has already lived through industrial transformation. It knows that power now flows through finance as much as force. The contrarian truth at the center of this story is uncomfortable. Control does not require conquest when debt can do the work. Britain does not need to occupy Ottoman cities or replace its rulers. It needs access. Access to revenue streams. Access to decision-making. Access to the future. Loans arrive framed as assistance, not pressure. Advisors arrive framed as experts, not overseers. Each offer is reasonable on its own. Each one solves an immediate problem. Together, they form a system that reshapes who really holds power. This is not a trap that snaps shut. It is a net that tightens slowly, almost politely. Imagine the position of an empire that once dictated terms of the world. Now imagine that same empire sitting across a table, negotiating interest rates. Imagine officials weighing sovereignty against solvency. Refuse the loan and modernization stalls. Accept it and revenue must be pledged. Either choice carries risk, but one feels survivable. Time becomes a currency being purchased. Each agreement buys a few more years of stability. Each signature delays collapse. But time borrowed must be repaid, and repayment always comes from somewhere. Customs duties, trade taxes, state monopolies. The arteries of the economy are slowly promised away. Britain understands leverage better than most. It has learned that influence is strongest when it appears voluntary. No flags are raised. No troops march. Instead, there are spreadsheets, forecasts, and polite letters. Financial dependence creates predictability. Predictability creates control. When a state relies on foreign credit to function, its freedom narrows. Decisions are no longer made in isolation. They are weighed against reaction. How will lenders respond? Will credit dry up? Will confidence vanish? These questions begin to shape policy more than ideology or tradition. This is how power moves quietly without spectacle. The stakes extend far beyond balance sheets. Whoever controls Ottoman finances controls customs houses, ports, and trade routes linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. Whoever controls those routes influences prices, supply, and strategic access. Borders may remain unchanged on maps, but real authority starts to shift. Britain is not alone in seeing this opportunity, but it is the most disciplined in pursuing it. It does not rush. It does not threaten. It positions itself as essential, as helpful, as unavoidable. The empire does not fall into Britain's hands. It leans there, gradually out of necessity. This chapter asks a central question that echoes beyond history. How did Britain turn Ottoman weakness into leverage without firing a shot? How did an empire trade independence for survival piece by piece, often willingly, often without realizing the long-term cost? The answer lies not in betrayal or incompetence, but in structure. In a world where capital moves faster than armies, financial pressure becomes a weapon, one that leaves no rubble, only obligations. Short lines and contracts. Long shadows across the future. Picture the rooms where this power shifts. Heavy curtains drawn against the night. Maps marked with rail lines and ports. Ledgers open to columns of numbers that decide what can be built and what must wait. These are not dramatic scenes, but they are decisive ones. A loan approved here means a reform delayed there. An interest payment made on time reassures markets, but drains funds from local needs. Each choice seems small. Each one feels rational. Together, they form a path that is hard to reverse. What makes this story unsettling is how ordinary it feels. There is no villain twirling a mustache. There is no single moment of surrender. There is only pressure applied steadily, professionally, and legally. Britain does not need to force compliance when the system encourages it. The empire still governs itself on paper. In practice, its room to maneuver shrinks. Policies are shaped by what creditors will tolerate. Ambitions are scaled back to what budgets allow. Sovereignty becomes conditional. Think about that. An empire that once controlled trade now depends on approval to finance its own infrastructure. An empire that once intimidated rivals now reassures investors. This is the quiet transformation at the heart of the story. It does not announce itself. It reveals itself later, when options have narrowed and alternatives have vanished. By then, the shift feels inevitable. But it was not. It was constructed, agreement by agreement, under the pressure of modern economics. This opening chapter sets the stage for what follows. Not a tale of sudden collapse, but of gradual capture. Not a story of invasion, but of invitation. Britain waits because it can afford to. The Ottoman Empire cannot. That imbalance defines everything that comes next. As the world accelerates, those who control capital shape outcomes. Those who need to adapt or submit. The ink dries, the lamps flicker, and without a single shot fired, the balance of power begins to move. To understand how the trap worked, you have to see the illusion first. On the surface, the Ottoman Empire still looks formidable. Its cities pulse with life. Markets spill into narrow streets. Ports echo with the sound of cranes, carts, and voices speaking dozens of languages. Istanbul remains a spectacle of power and history, where domes rise above the water and imperial ceremony still commands respect. Soldiers drill in uniform. Flags hang from government buildings. From a distance, the empire appears intact, even resilient. Many believe it has weathered storms before and will do so again. That belief is the first layer of protection for Britain's strategy. For centuries, the Ottomans sat at the center of global movement. Goods flowed through their lands from east to west and north to south. Taxes collected at key choke points filled imperial coffers. Control of straits and ports gave the empire leverage over rivals who depended on trade. This legacy created confidence, even complacency. Power had always returned in one form or another, but the world was changing faster than tradition could adapt. Industrial economies demanded speed, scale, and constant investment. Steam replaced sail. Rail replaced caravan. The old systems were not designed for this pace. They strained under it. From the outside, the machine still moved. That was a danger. European newspapers spoke of reform and revival. Diplomats praised modernization efforts. Advisors wrote optimistic reports. European banks competed to lend money, each eager to gain influence in a region that mattered strategically. To investors, the empire looked like a massive opportunity. Vast territory, millions of people, untapped resources. The assumption was simple. With the right guidance and enough capital, the empire could modernize and stabilize. What those reports rarely captured was how fragile the foundation had become. Modern war changed everything. Maintaining armies now required constant spending, not seasonal campaigns. Weapons grew more complex and more expensive. Railways had to be built not just for trade, but for rapid troop movement. Steam fleets consumed fuel at a rate older budgets never anticipated. Bureaucracy expanded to manage this complexity, bringing salaries, pensions, and administrative costs that never disappeared. Revenue, meanwhile, lagged behind. Tax systems were outdated. Collection was uneven. Corruption and inefficiency drained funds before they reached the center. The empire was running faster just to stay in place. Yet appearances mattered. As long as ships sailed and ceremonies continued, confidence held. And confidence is everything in finance. Britain understood this better than most. Confidence keeps credit flowing. Credit keeps systems alive. So long as the empire appeared stable, borrowing remained possible. Each new loan masked the underlying weakness. Each reform announcement reassured foreign markets. The illusion of strength became a financial asset in itself. Britain did not challenge that illusion. It reinforced it. Because as long as borrowing continued, leverage deepened. Behind closed doors, the reality was harsher. Treasury officials faced constant shortfalls. Emergency measures became routine. Short-term fixes replaced long-term planning. Currency stability wavered as obligations mounted. Small shocks rippled through the system more violently than before. A poor harvest, a regional uprising, a trade disruption. Each one forced new borrowing to cover old promises. The empire was not collapsing, but it was bending. Britain watched closely, learning where the pressure points were. The key insight was simple but devastating. Strength was no longer measured by land or population alone. It was measured by liquidity. Who could pay today, tomorrow, and the day after? Whoever financed survival gained a voice in how survival was managed. Britain positioned itself as indispensable by aligning its help with the empire's most urgent needs. Railways were financed with British capital. Trade access was structured around British interests. Financial stability came with oversight. None of this was framed as control. It was framed as partnership. From the Ottoman perspective, these arrangements felt rational. Declining them meant isolation. Accepting them meant progress. Each project promised efficiency and security. Rail lines would unify the empire and deter rebellion. Ports would boost trade. Reforms would modernize administration. But every project tied future revenue to repayment. Customs duties were earmarked. Monopolies were pledged. Income streams that once funded independent decisions were now committed to servicing debt. Options narrowed quietly. Britain understood that modernization created dependency when financed externally. A railway built with foreign money cannot be ignored. It must be maintained. It must generate revenue. That revenue must be predictable. Predictability favors creditors. Over time, policy choices begin to serve stability over sovereignty. Decisions are shaped by what keeps credit available. Risk-taking declines. Autonomy erodes without a formal transfer of authority. The empire still ruled itself, but within boundaries defined elsewhere. The illusion of strength persisted because collapse was not immediate. In fact, borrowing often created short-term improvement. Infrastructure expanded. Trade increased. Employment rose in certain sectors. These gains were real, but they were fragile. They depended on continuous access to capital. Once that access became conditional, leverage shifted decisively. Britain did not need to threaten withdrawal. The mere possibility was enough. Markets respond to signals, not speeches. A hint of concern could raise interest rates or tighten terms. That pressure traveled faster than any army. Imagine the mindset of imperial officials navigating this environment. Every decision carried financial consequences. Approve a project, and borrowing increased. Delay it, and reform stalled. Push back against oversight, and lenders grew nervous. Reassure them, and autonomy slipped further away. None of these choices felt like surrender. They felt like management, responsible governance. But responsibility defined by creditors is a narrow space. What made the situation especially dangerous was its complexity. There was no single moment to resist, no clear line to defend. Power moved through systems, not decrees. Britain excelled at operating within those systems. It spoke the language of accounting and efficiency. It framed its influence as technical, not political. Advisors did not issue commands. They made recommendations. Budgets did the rest. When money flows determine outcomes, recommendations carry weight. This is why the empire still looks strong, even as its options shrank. Ceremony masked constraint. Geography masked dependence. History masked vulnerability. Britain did not need to dismantle the illusion. It needed to work beneath it. Every year that passed without visible crisis deepened the sense that the arrangement was working. And every year increased the cost of reversing it. The longer dependency lasted, the harder independence became. Think about that. An empire can appear powerful long after it has lost control over its own future. Strength on the surface can coexist with weakness underneath. Britain recognized this gap and exploited it patiently. It did not rush to claim victory because victory was not the goal. Stability was. A stable debtor is far more valuable than a collapsed one. As long as the empire functioned, revenue flowed. As long as revenue flowed, influence endured. By the end of this phase, the illusion had done its work. The empire still stood. It still commanded respect. But its financial foundations were increasingly intertwined with foreign interests. Britain had positioned itself not as a rival, but as a necessity. The trap was not yet obvious. It felt like progress. It looked like modernization. But beneath the surface, the balance had shifted. And once that shift occurred, the next stage became inevitable. The turning point does not arrive with panic or spectacle. It arrives quietly, disguised as routine. A payment delayed here, a shortfall covered there. Emergency measures become normal practice. What looks like temporary strain settles into a pattern. And patterns, once established, shape outcomes more than intentions ever could. The Ottoman Empire does not collapse in this moment. It adapts. But adaptation under pressure has a direction, and that direction is rarely chosen freely. At first, the gap seemed manageable. Revenues come in late. Expenses rise unexpectedly. Loans bridge the difference. Each loan is justified as exceptional, a response to circumstance, a necessary adjustment to modern realities. But exceptions pile up. Interest compounds. Repayment schedules overlap. Soon, borrowing is no longer about expansion or reform. It is about survival. Servicing old debt requires new debt. The system feeds on itself. Britain understands this dynamic well. It is not chaos. It is leverage. Control of cash flow becomes a decisive factor. Not control in a dramatic sense, but in a procedural one. Customs revenues are pledged to guarantee repayment. Certain taxes are earmarked before they ever reach domestic priorities. Trade monopolies are structured to ensure predictability. Predictability reassures lenders. Reassurance lowers risk. Lower risk keeps money flowing. The logic is clean, even elegant, but it comes at a cost. When income is pre-committed, flexibility disappears. Policy becomes reactive. Choice narrows. Foreign advisors begin to assist more closely. They review budgets. They recommend efficiencies. They highlight waste. On paper, this looks helpful. Who would oppose better management? But management implies authority. Authority implies influence. Over time, recommendations carry consequences. Deviating from them raises concerns. Concerns ripple through financial networks. Credit tightens. Rates rise. Pressure builds. The empire still makes its own decisions, but the margin for disagreement shrinks. This is not occupation. It is administration by spreadsheet. The cracks widen as the global economy tightens around the empire's limitations. Trade imbalances grow. Imported goods, often cheaper and tied to foreign trade terms, undercut local producers. Domestic industries struggle to compete. Employment becomes uneven. Regions dependent on traditional production fall behind. Revenue growth lags behind obligations. Interest grows faster than output. This imbalance is fatal over time. It ensures dependency becomes permanent rather than temporary. Think about the psychological shift this creates. Officials begin to plan around debt schedules rather than national priorities. Budgets are written with creditors in mind. Stability becomes the overriding goal. Stability for markets, stability for lenders, stability for exchange rates. Political ambition gives way to financial caution. Risk becomes something to avoid rather than manage. The empire still governs, but it governs within invisible walls. Walls built from numbers, not stone. Britain does not need to enforce the system overtly. The rules enforce themselves. Miss a payment and confidence falters. Confidence falters and borrowing becomes expensive. Expensive borrowing drains resources faster. The threat is implicit, not explicit. No one needs to say no. The answer is already embedded in the system. This is what makes the mechanism so effective. It removes the need for confrontation. It replaces force with incentive. Over time, the surrender becomes quiet and almost logical. Financial autonomy is traded for stability, not because autonomy is unvalued, but because instability feels worse. The choice is framed as technical, not political. Balance the books or risk collapse. Accept oversight or lose access. Each step seems responsible. Each one feels unavoidable. Imagine vaults where keys are shared, ledgers written in foreign hands, decisions delayed until reassurance arrives. Who really governs when revenue is already spoken for? This is the moment when control truly shifts. Not when treaties are signed or borders discussed, but when the future becomes predictable to outsiders. Predictability is power. When Britain can forecast Ottoman behavior based on financial constraints, influence becomes reliable. The empire becomes manageable. Its responses align with expectations. Surprise disappears. And without surprise, resistance loses momentum. Power no longer needs to be asserted. It is assumed. The machinery of debt continues to turn. One agreement leads to another. Restructuring follows refinancing. Oversight deepens incrementally. Each new layer is justified by the previous one. The system grows complex enough that reversing it feels impossible. Too many obligations. Too many stakeholders. Too many consequences. Independence becomes a theoretical concept rather than a practical option. The empire is still sovereign in name, but sovereignty without fiscal freedom is fragile. Britain's advantage lies in patience. There is no rush to extract everything at once. Stability remains a priority. A stable debtor generates steady returns and predictable influence. A collapsed state creates uncertainty and risk. Britain prefers the former. It encourages reforms that maintain order and revenue flow. It discourages actions that might disrupt repayment. The empire's priorities gradually align with those preferences, not through coercion, but through structure. The tragedy of this moment is that it feels invisible from the outside. There are no dramatic announcements, no declarations of loss. Daily life continues. Markets open. Ships sail. Officials meet. The empire still appears functional, but the center of gravity has moved. Decisions are shaped by anticipation of reaction elsewhere. Autonomy erodes not because it is taken, but because it becomes impractical to exercise. Think about that. Power has shifted without a single soldier crossing a border. Control has changed hands without flags being lowered. The empire's fate is now tied to schedules and rates set beyond its reach. Short lines and contracts have produced long consequences. And once this stage is reached, escape becomes extraordinarily difficult. Growth would need to outpace interest. Revenue would need to exceed obligation. Confidence would need to be rebuilt without borrowing. Each requirement is daunting on its own. Together, they form a barrier that few states ever overcome. By the end of this chapter, the transformation is complete. Not visibly, not officially, but structurally. Britain does not rule the empire. It does not need to. It has shaped the environment in which the empire operates. Within that environment, outcomes favor British interests naturally. This is the silent victory of finance over force. The moment when history turns without noise. The empire still stands. It will continue to stand for a time, but it now moves within limits set by others. And when future crises arrive, as they always do, those limits will matter. The balance sheet has replaced the battlefield as the decisive terrain. Control has shifted. Quietly, legally, almost politely. Collapse rarely looks dramatic while it's happening. There is no single day when the Ottoman Empire ceases to function. No moment when the machinery simply stops. Instead, it continues to operate in a diminished state, administratively hollow, politically constrained, economically exposed. The structures remain, but the flexibility is gone. Decisions take longer. Responses feel slower. Every action must pass through layers of financial consequence. The empire still exists, but it no longer controls the conditions of its own survival. When external shocks finally arrive, they land on a system already weakened. War, rebellion, and international pressure do not create the collapse. They reveal it. The financial framework that once promised stability now magnifies stress. Revenues fall just as obligations remain fixed. Borrowing becomes harder. Confidence wavers. Emergency measures return, but their effect is smaller each time. The room to maneuver has vanished. Years of dependency have left the state brittle. What once bent under pressure now begins to crack. Britain steps in during this phase not as a conqueror, but as a manager of outcomes. Its role appears measured, almost reluctant. It does not seize territory outright in the old imperial fashion. It supervises. It advises. It helps restore order. Financial arrangements made years earlier now justify deeper involvement. Oversight expands. Guarantees are enforced. The logic is presented as necessity. Stability must be preserved. Debts must be honored. Trade must continue. Each intervention is framed as temporary. Together, they shape the future. Borders begin to shift, not randomly, but along lines of economic interest. Regions with strategic value are separated from those that are liabilities. Resources are redirected to serve external markets more efficiently. New administrative structures emerge that look independent on paper, but remain financially entangled. Control has not disappeared. It has been reorganized. The backroom deals signed decades earlier now determine which areas are prioritized and which are neglected. The empire's former unity dissolves into managed fragments. For those living through it, the change feels confusing rather than catastrophic. Daily life continues. Institutions still function, but expectations shrink. Ambition fades. The idea of autonomous revival becomes distant, almost unrealistic. The system rewards compliance and punishes disruption. Stability is prized above all else. Political choices narrow to what markets will tolerate. Sovereignty becomes conditional. This is not the end people imagine, but it is an end all the same. What remains after formal collapse is not simply a historical footnote. It is a pattern. Power has shifted from visible rule to structural influence. Britain no longer needs to govern directly. The economic architecture does the work. Trade routes, financial obligations, and administrative precedents outlast flags and ceremonies. The empire's story becomes a warning written into the landscape of the modern world. Think about the relevance of that today. Power still moves through credit access and dependency. Ships may be replaced by data flows, ledgers by digital accounts. But the logic remains unchanged. Those who finance survival shape the rules of survival. Those who depend on external capital operate within constraints they did not design. Control the money, and you shape the map. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but decisively. The Ottoman story is not simply about decline. It is about how influence is built invisibly, patiently, and legally. How sovereignty can be reduced without being formally taken. How agreements meant to solve urgent problems can define generations. The empire did not fall because it failed to fight. It fell because it fought a new kind of war with old assumptions. And in that war, economics proved more decisive than armies. This is why the story matters beyond its time. It explains how power can change hands without headlines, how futures can be decided long before outcomes appear inevitable. The choices faced then still exist now. Accept a deal, or face the cost of saying no. Manage stability today, or preserve freedom tomorrow. Those are never easy decisions. And history shows they rarely come without consequence. If the story changed how you see power, history, and the forces that quietly shape the world, subscribe to the channel for more cinematic explorations beneath the surface of global events. And if you believe others should understand how control really works, share the story. Because the most important battles are often the ones no one notices until they are already over.